Today is Monday, August 27th, and this is the ADM Investor Services Monday Market Kickoff. Please note that the views and opinions expressed here today are solely those of our guests and should not be construed as the views or opinions of ADM Investor Services or Archer Daniels Midland Company. Today's guests are Steve Freed, Vice President of Grain Research at ADMIS, and Alan Bush, ADM Investor Services Senior Financial Economist. Steve, Pro Farmer had their annual U.S. Midwest crop tour last week. What did they find?
They found a big crop. They've confirmed the USDA's record corn yield across the Midwest. There were some spots that had been dry or too wet, but overall, record corn yield. And they actually increased the soybean yield from the USDA's record number to a new record high and a new record crop. So prices earlier this morning were down because of their yields.
Last week, there were more trade talks between the U.S. and China. What were the results?
They came with no resolution. And so they went back to the drawing board and they're trying to figure out what to do next. I mean, there's intellectual property is an important thing that China will not give up, and the difference between trade deficit between China and the United States is something the U.S. wants to narrow.
Soybean and grain futures are continuing to drop. Why is this?
I think it's because of too much supply. I mean, I think for soybeans, losing the China export demand is a negative. And we also are expecting Brazil to increase their bean acres when they start planting in October. And then also in the corn market, I think we're just kind of in front of harvest. It's really hard to rally. Now it's kind of interesting how we're bouncing corn prices now because of imminent announcement that U.S. and Mexico will come up with a deal on NAFTA. So that should help corn, and it might help cattle and hogs. As far as the wheat market, we're still trading the fact that there's too much supply and not enough export demand out of the United States.
And what is the latest on U.S. aid to farmers due to the U.S.-China trade war?
Today, the Secretary of Agriculture will come out and say what they're going to do. And basically what we've been hearing is that the farmers need to sell the beans, get a confirmation of the bushels they grew this year, and then go to the FSA office and they'll get a check for those bushels times $1.65. And that's going to be somewhere around $7.5 billion of the $12 billion that's been allocated to help farmers.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Alan, let's talk financials. Last Friday at the Jackson Hole Symposium, Federal Reserve Chairman Powell made comments that were not quite as hawkish as some analysts had expected. How does this affect Fed policy?
Well, for this year, I believe it has no effect. It still appears that the Fed is going to raise interest rates in September and once more in December. But next year, it appears that the Fed may be scaling back some of their hawkish expectations on policy. It now looks like there may only be 1 to 2 rate increases in 2019 instead of the previously expected 2 to 3 rate hikes.
Can you give us an outlook for U.S. gross domestic product for the rest of this year?
Still looks good. In fact, for the third quarter, the Atlanta Fed is now predicting that GDP will be up 4.6%. So that was better than what we had in the second quarter. So GDP ought to hold up very well this year. So I'm very optimistic that the U.S. economy will continue on a firm note.
Okay. S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Russell 2000 futures advanced to new record highs today. What is the outlook for stock index futures now?
So we still have the ongoing trade wars. Of course, as Steve mentioned, maybe a resolution to trade issues between the U.S. and Mexico. Still a lot to be done between the U.S. and China as far as the trade situation there. But once again, it's still the very low interest rate environment, even though the Fed has raised rates quite a few times in the last couple of years. So it's the low rate structure, not just in the U.S. but globally, that has continued to support stock index futures. So I remain very optimistic. In fact, I believe that the stock index futures will continue to advance for the rest of this year.
Okay, thank you both for your time. Remember, the views and opinions expressed here today on this video are solely those of our guests and should not be construed as the views or opinions of ADM Investor Services or Archer Daniels Midland Company. If you'd like more information about our brokerage services, or would like to speak to one of our experts about managing your risk, or would like to open a trading account, please visit www.admis.com. Thank you.